Hi everybody, it's Laura from Green Tree, and today we're talking about how to use up kale. This time of year, a lot of us have quite a bit of kale. Whether you're getting it in your CSA, picking it up at the farmer's market, or it's all coming in your garden, it can be a little overwhelming sometimes. So this is one variety of kale. You guys have probably seen this before. It's frequently called dinosaur kale because you can see all the little bumps on the skin there. Sometimes it's also called Tuscan kale. It's a little bit more tender and delicate than some of the more curly-leaved varieties. So kale is actually a type of leafy cabbage. Instead of forming all tight into a ball the way that we think of a standard head of cabbage, this just has the same type of structure and the same similar flavor, but it comes all out in individual leaves. It actually looks a lot like this when it's growing, but they tend to be a little bit wider spaced. Kale is a European vegetable. It was one of the main vegetables there for a really long time because it's super easy to grow. It's really cold tolerant. Kale will grow even up to, I believe it's negative 15 degrees. So you can actually overwinter this even in Michigan with just a little bit of covering or something like a little sunbox with a window or some heavy plastic to keep it warm, which is nice because when there's no other fresh greens to be had, kale comes to the rescue. Like cabbage, there's a ton of different kinds of kale. This one right here is green kale, winter boar kale, curly kale. It's referred to by a lot of different names. This is like the big, fluffy, somewhat chewier variety. It grows like crazy. It's technically an annual, but like I said, it will sometimes overwinter. Kale is a really good source of quite a few different vitamins and minerals, including calcium, B vitamins, vitamin A and E. So there's a lot to be had from it health-wise. Now, the thing about kale is a lot of people think of it as something that you have to cook, but you can actually eat it raw. See, I got my little gloves on today. And one of the ways that we like to do that is in a marinated salad. So this is something that our deli makes. This is actually really good. This is what I'm sampling today. It's got these nice bits of tomatoes and peppers in it. There are chickpeas, that's chickpea, to give it a little bit of protein and a little bit more of that stick-to-itness. Kale is super low calorie for the bulk, but it also has a lot of fiber, so it'll keep you full a lot longer than a similarly sized bowl of, say, lettuce. So it's really good for that kind of thing. So the issue is, for a lot of us, we have fridges full of bunches of kale, and we're wondering, okay, how do I use this up? I either planted too much, I got too much in my CSA this week, so I need some other ideas. So I have a list for you. I'm going to keep going back to it to make sure that I get through everything on it. My probably favorite way to use up kale, and I usually use this kind. My favorite is actually red Russian kale, but it's a little bit harder to find. But this nice curly winter boar kale works great in taco filling. What I do is chop this up relatively small, but it doesn't have to be tiny because it'll wilt when you cook it. And I'll mix like half a bunch of this and a can of black beans with the, in my case I usually use burger, but you could easily do it with TVP or lentils, any other kind of taco filling that you want to use. And then just add 2 packages of taco filling. You get twice as much filling, you get to use up your kale, you get some beans in there, so it's just generally a much healthier dish, and nobody's going to notice. Unless you leave your kale in big long pieces that you're kind of pulling out of the taco as you go, it's really seamlessly integrated, and the flavor doesn't overwhelm the rest of the dish. Another thing you can do is make pesto out of kale. So it works exactly the same as making pesto out of basil or parsley or any other green leafy herb. Kale has a pretty mild flavor, so if you want a stronger tasting pesto, you can add just a little bit of some other herb like basil or even chives to kick it up a little bit. Or you could try getting a little bit adventurous and adding, say, I don't know, maybe cumin or garlic, something that's got a more pungent flavor to kick up that pesto while still using up your kale. You can also use the flat kinds like lacinato, or even some of the red Russian kales are a little bit flatter as a wrap. So you can go ahead and put a salad in that. You could roll up your, well, you could use your tacos in it if you wanted to have a carb-free shell. So we have a question here from Anita. She said she just bought her first bunch, and how can you store it and how long is it good? If you have the space in your fridge, you can go ahead and cut off the bottoms and actually put it like in a glass of water and cover it with, I like to just use a produce bag and basically stand it up in the fridge like a batch of flowers, and it'll keep for a long time like that, weeks even. If you think you're going to use it up faster than that, you can just take this, keep it in a plastic bag in the bottom of the fridge, either in the crisper drawers or on the bottom shelf where it's a little bit cooler, and it'll probably keep for at least a week down there. The main reason you want to have it in some kind of a bag, whether it's in a vase or a glass mason jar or in a bag, is because the leaves will basically slowly start to dehydrate. Just imagine yourself like walking and walking and walking for hours. Even if it's not warm out, you start to get dehydrated, and the kale's the same way. If it's cold, that's great, but if it gets dehydrated, you're going to lose it. So just keep it in a bag or stand it up in a glass of water, and it'll last for 1 to 3 weeks depending on your fridge and the type of kale, if you keep it in there that long. Hopefully with these suggestions you'll go through it quicker than that. So let's see, using it as a wrap, you can also chop up the kale and mix it into risotto, mix it into a pasta dish, or put it in with your mashed potatoes. There's actually a traditional Danish dish, I just learned about this recently, but I'm definitely going to try it, called stampot. Which basically you take steamed kale and you mash it into your potatoes until the whole thing turns green, which my experience with colorful potatoes has been pretty good so far, so I don't see why I wouldn't do it with kale. Plus it's a good excuse to eat mashed potatoes. Let's see, next we have, it works really well in soups, much better than spinach because the leaves have so much more fiber and intensity to them. So they hold together a lot better, and you can toss them in at any point in the cooking. A fairly common soup that you'll see kale in is with sort of a clear vegetable broth or a chicken broth, white beans, kale, and oftentimes sausage or some other savory protein, whether it's a vegetarian protein or a meat protein. But you can really put it in just about anything. I think sometimes people put it in minestrone, although I don't make a lot of tomato-based soups, so I'm not 100% sure on that one. You can puree it with lemon or lime and freeze it in ice cubes for use in smoothies. So the reason that you add the citrus is because, so you can see it best where the stems are, and all of these little branching sort of, I don't know, veins? I'm not sure what to call them. But kale is a fairly fibrous green. It's got a lot of tear to it. And if you puree it with an acid, like lemon or lime juice, that helps break down that cell structure. So you add just enough to moisten the whole thing and then freeze it in ice cubes. And the nice thing about using lemon or lime rather than something like a vinegar is that it's much more versatile if you decide you want to use those cubes in cooking and not just in your smoothies. Because with that lemon or lime, they could easily be added into a Mexican dish or an Asian dish or an Italian dish. You could just toss it right in as you go. And that saves having to process it as you're doing the recipes. Let's see. You can massage and dress it for a raw salad, like we have from the deli. And again, you're going to want to use some kind of acid to help break it down. The most common things are going to be balsamic vinegar, red wine vinegar, even apple cider vinegar, or lemon and lime juice. And that again, the acid's going to soften it down so you can eat it raw. And the reason you might want to eat your kale raw at least some of the time is it has a lot of B vitamins, and B vitamins are one of the things that's broken down quite a bit in cooking. So the more that you cook, especially if you boil the kale, like if it's actually submerged in a cooking liquid, you're going to lose a lot more B vitamins than if you have it raw. So it's nice to have it raw at least some of the time. So I've actually done this before. You can dehydrate the kale and then powder it, and you can add that into casseroles, soups, any kind of savory dish. What I actually like to do is when I start getting overwhelmed by vegetables in the summer, either from my CSA or from gardens, whatever it be, I will dehydrate usually tomatoes, carrots, kale, onions, garlic. I'll do a whole blend of whatever vegetables I have, dehydrate them, pulverize them all together in like a food processor, and you can actually use that even as a popcorn seasoning. Like, it's really flavorful when you blend all of those vegetables together, and you can literally sprinkle it on like you would something like Italian seasoning or Mrs. Dash. Oh, if you've never made saag, I talked about that in the Indian foods video. Saag is basically a silky smooth, it's like a sauce that you make out of greens. It's more traditionally made with spinach or mustard greens, but you can make it with kale. It just has a very slightly coarser texture. There's a ton of recipes on the internet for it. It's spelled S-A-A-G, and that's an easy thing you can use as a side dish. You can mix it into other things, serve it with rice. It's pretty tasty. You could do southern style greens, which there's a few different approaches to that. Sometimes it's just done as a saute. Often it's simmered in a cooking liquid like a broth. There's usually some kind of bacon or ham, some kind of salty pork in it. If you prefer to have it vegan, you could easily use something like the tempeh bacon strips and to get that same kind of flavor. You can add it to scrambled eggs or scrambled tofu. It actually blends in fairly well, and with just a small amount of cooking, if it's chopped enough, the kale will disappear into whatever you're making. You can put it in a burger, and that also goes for meatloaf, meatballs. Anytime you can add greens into something like that, you're adding fiber to that fat and protein, which is going to move it through your system more smoothly, and again, use up your kale. So that's a good way to do it. Whether you're doing that vegetarian or carnivorous, either way, it fits well with the texture, and so long as it's cooked fully, will pretty much disappear into the dish. And then finally, if you haven't done this before, you can make kale chips. Kale chips are super easy to do. There's a million recipes for that too. Check Pinterest, YouTube, just Google it, and you'll find probably 30 recipes in 2 seconds. So there's some ideas on how you can use up your kale. If you have any other questions, go ahead and post them in the comments. I'll try and answer those later. And I will have a recipe for just the simplest way you can do it, just to saute kale, either later today or more likely this weekend. So you guys have a great afternoon. If you want to try the salad, come on down and see me. I'll be doing this till about 6. Happy Tuesday, guys. Bye.